welcome to the Muscle Car Modeler. My name is Ral, and this week I want to feature one of my race cars. This is of course a GT40 Mark II, and this car should need no introduction, especially with the recent film Ford versus Ferrari. If you've seen that, this car has a lot to do with that particular story, but more specifically the GT40 than this exact car. This one is the one that officially won the 1966 Le Mans, 24 Hours of Le Mans, Ford and Shelby American. So here's my build of it. But these cars are kind of interesting and fun to research in the fact that they're point of reference restorations. And when you get into one of these cars or any race car, they're point in time, restorations, or however you want to look at it, a point of time, a significant point of time of history, and that's what makes them pretty interesting. And especially if you own the real car and you have to choose how do you want to present it, what's the most significant thing that specific car or chassis number did. And much like this one, although this one much easier, it's kind of fun to research. Some of these cars, the GT40s in general, and any race car, but they go through a lot through their lifespans, and some of them, they were just used race cars that had like no value. But what's interesting, this particular car, chassis number P1046, is it really doesn't have a significant race history. It's only been in 2 races, which I find that's kind of fascinating, because it was a brand new chassis tub and that was sent to Shelby American, and it was built and prepped for racing at Le Mans. That was its actual first race, and it was the 47th GT40 built. Of course, they're all purpose built, just throwing money at them and getting them out there. But it was entered in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. That was its first race. And as we all know, that's the most significant one because it won that race. It did a little bit of test mule time before that, test time, and even after the race. And what's interesting is, if you've seen the movie or you know the story, it's the official winner, but Ken Miles should have won the race. But you can watch the movie for all of that. The movie, I think, is great. There's some areas that it may not be completely historically accurate, but the car itself. And what's fun for me when I research these cars, and especially some of the more seasoned cars, like I said, this one's only been in 2 races. It was in that one, and then it did a little bit of more test mule time, and it was entered in the 67 24 Hours of Daytona. But it didn't win. The gearbox went out, and it was did not finish. And that was pretty much the end of its racing career. But what I think is funny is, Ford was so proud, and they got their photo finish, and this was the car that won, and they got their photo finish. You would think Ford would snatch this car up right after the race, and they would parade it around, show it off. You would take it to different dealerships or showrooms, or bring it around and just advertise that this is the car that beat Ferrari, show off the actual car. Well, Ford didn't do that. It went right back to Shelby, and it was being used as a test mule. They painted it for the 24 Hours of Daytona, which I believe it was the number 6 car, and I believe it was silver. I believe it was silver, and it was the number 6 car, but the transaxle went out, and it did not finish the race. And then after that, it did a little bit more test mule, and then it became a parts donor. So the car itself, really, really short-lived history, and was in the spotlight pretty much that one time. And it was driven by Bruce McLaren and Chris Amon. And what's interesting on the car itself, both of those guys were born in New Zealand. And I don't know if anybody knows, that's what this sticker is all about. It's for the country New Zealand, and they hand painted that on the car. And it was just for those guys. It was kind of like, hey, this is for you. A couple of New Zealanders driving the car, and and you don't get this decal with Fujimi. Just so you know, the Fujimi decals that came in my kit, they were pretty worn and not very white, which their decals are not the greatest in these kits. So I actually bought these decals through spotmodel.com, but they're Renaissance Models decals. And so I had, and the sad part is they're like $25 a set plus shipping. I messed up my first paint job. I had some problems with the clear coat, and I don't think I washed it real well or whatever. It fisheyed in some spots. So I ended up having to strip the car, and I decided I'm going to repaint it and do it all over again because I just messed it up. Sometimes I can polish it out and save it. This one I couldn't, so I ended up stripping it and redoing it. So I bought the decals twice. So I got easily $50 in the decals and and then the paint job. But that's me. I like the really nice shiny over restored look. I just really like that. The cars never looked this nice at the race, plus getting dirty during the race. So if somebody weathers them up and dirties them up and they look great, I've seen somebody who'd built a diorama of all 3 cars crossing the finish line all dirty. I thought that was cool. My personal style, I like building them like this. This one's built right out of the box. I didn't do anything to it. But another interesting thing, the history on this car, like I was saying, it was painted silver. It was the number 6 car. And then after its racing duties were over, it became a parts car. These cars were wrecked. They were disposable. They were started to make. They had plenty of them out there, and they started to just scrap the ones that were getting kind of older and use them for parts. So when it comes to researching the history on some of these cars, it's interesting to find out how hard it is to identify some of these cars and which one it actually is based on its parts content. And remember, like this one is P1046. That's not a VIN number. That's just a little plaque and number assigned by the manufacturer as a chassis number. It really doesn't have a title attached to it or any real ownership to it. These things don't have VIN numbers. They're not supposed to be registered for the street, which is what I thought was interesting about this car. Is after it was relegated to parts status and robbed for parts for other racing GT40s, and whatever they needed parts for, they just grabbed them off of some of these extra cars, and this became one of those extra cars. It ended up getting sold off. And in the history of reading about some of that stuff, and this one, it's still not very glamorous. There's some other GT40 cars that have some really interesting histories, especially when there was one of them that came up for auction with the serial number, a P chassis, and then somebody else claimed to have owned the actual car, and that there was 2 of them. Well, I'll get into that one. That one's really fun if you like that kind of stuff. But this one, it was sold off to a few guys. It went through 3 owners. Not really sure what happened to it, but one of them put air conditioning in it, put a closed circuit rear view camera in it, and was driving it on the street. Now I don't know back then if you were able to do it. It's even harder now, but some states will issue titles and you can drive it, but it's technically still not federally legal to drive on the street. There are kind of ways to get around that, or certain events, but most of them are, now that they're worth millions, you're not going to see somebody driving one of these on the street. But back then they were worthless. It was just a used race car that nobody wanted. It got passed around. This guy wanted to drive it, put air conditioning in it, put a camera in it so he can see out the back when he's backing up, and it had a gold metal flake paint job with black trim. Obviously it was a GT40, but by 1983 it was in a crate in Belgium, and collector George Stauffer, I think is how you say it. I'm not really sure. I had found it, and knew it was a GT40 and it was a Mark II. I don't know if it had its original engine. There's really no original engines or trannies because nothing was serialized. It's just correct for the time period. And there's another GT40 expert, Ronnie Spain, studied the car that he had found, and he spent months looking it over, going through all the parts and just checking it out, because on these a lot of the suspension parts were marked with a chassis number and a lot of that. So the car, was marked heavily with a lot of that stuff, and it carried a lot of its components, considering it was really only used twice, and it was somewhat parted out, but not really parted out. It was pretty complete, and so he had purchased it, and it had been restored, and he started vintage racing it. And this car has actually been sold a number of times, and right now RK Motorsports actually owns the real one, this car, and they've restored it to as perfect, period correct as it would have appeared at the race. They've restored the car all the way to that livery. I mean, it's been known as this car for like 30 years, and it's been restored a couple of times to, you know, this race livery. So the car has been known for a long time, but it has some missing history and some gaps where it had shown up and been around the block a little bit. But so some of the cars have even more colorful history and vague history on what happened to them, where they went, and how they were found. So those are kind of fun to read about. This one's not real glamorous in that respect, you know, and its racing history only being actually in 2 races as far as this exact chassis number. But I love these kits, the Fujimi kits. They're real simple. There's no engine in them. There's now a resin Mark II engine that's out by I know Scale Production sells it. I bought one. Somebody else is actually making it. And then there's the small block Mark I's that came later. I've actually got like 6 or 7 of these built, but this is the first one I'm featuring on the channel. And I decided to pick this one because it's the most well-known, especially with the Ford versus Ferrari movie. And I've got the other 2 kits also, because Fujimi did all 3 of them. So you can build the first, second, and third place cars, which this is the #1 car, the official winner. And then Ken Miles' car, the blue #1 car, and then the third place car, the gold #5 car. I'll show you the box arts of all of those, you know, in clips in the video. But I figure I would show you this one and just show it off a little bit. I mean, like I said, it's kind of a curbside. There's not a whole lot to see in there, and then the underside. But still a great kit to build. I enjoy building them. And they're real simple builds. But other than, you know, this one not having the original decals, and I use those decals, and I've actually used Renaissance decals on some of the other ones as well, and I will feature them at another time. But I figured you would enjoy this one, and so thank you for subscribing, and thank you for watching, and hit that bell button. You'll see any of my latest videos. You'll get notified on them. And please comment. I'd love to read the comments and comment back to them. And thank you. And you guys, you have a wonderful day.